So I have found the cheapest automatic Japanese watch. This particular model is readily available for under $100, which is actually quite a rare occurrence these days. Japanese watches used to be some of the most affordable. However, with recent inflation, prices are very comparable to watches from Switzerland. So when a Japanese watch pops up for under $100, it is something that we should definitely check out. But the question is this a good value proposition, or is it a $100 hot steaming pile of trash? In this video, we'll find out. Now, before we get into the $100 watch that's in question, let's first take a look at why Japanese watches are so respected by enthusiasts. Because some watch fans consider them on a higher level than even the likes of the Swiss. Japan has a rich history when it comes to horology, with a history linking back to the mid-16th century. However, it was around the 1920s when the Japanese first got into creating wristwatches. This production lay dormant during the Second World War, where production in the country was focused on military needs. But in the 15 years following the end of the war, production of pocket watches, wristwatches and clocks were in the millions. Japanese watch brands competed with the Swiss to create the best possible watches, breaking many records throughout the years. But the Swiss still ruled the wristwatch industry. It wasn't until the 1970s when quartz watches were introduced to the watch market by Japanese giant Seiko, which had the Swiss watch industry on their knees, with many Swiss brands going out of business and hugely popular brands struggling for decades. The Swiss eventually recalibrated and decided to focus on the luxury market, allowing Japanese watch brands to rule the affordable watch world, which they did and still somewhat do to this day. But something changed. Over the last few years, the prices of Japanese watches has begun to rise, and right now the prices of the affordable Japanese watches are actually very comparable to the affordable Swiss watches. But the question is, why did this happen? We have seen a huge increase in the prices of watches in the last few years, seemingly more than ever before over a similar time period. It was only 5 years ago when an entry-level automatic Seiko or Citizen could be found easily under $100, and you actually had a ton of choice. No watch represents this better than the old school Seiko 5 range. These could be had for as little as $70 just a few years ago, but Seiko changed how they do business, rebranded the 5 range, discontinuing popular models and introducing new models with higher prices. Now an entry-level Seiko 5 from the modern catalogue costs around $250, which is a far cry away from the sub $100 price that they used to be. Other Japanese watch brands followed suit, including Citizen, Orient and even the budget kings Casio. Inflation is of course a normal part of the economy, but it seems like wristwatches have been rising way quicker than anything else. So finding a Japanese watch these days for under $100 is kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. But I have found one particular model that has a few dial options that actually comes in under this price point. The model we'll be taking a look at today is the Citizen NH8350. I paid under $100 for this particular watch. There's a couple of websites that this model can be found on for under $100, Creation Watches and Joma Shop. I've been a customer of both of these vendors in the past, so I have no problem shopping with them. This video isn't sponsored though. I bought this watch with my own money. There's a few different versions of this watch available to buy, one with a more minimalist dial and the other with Roman numerals. The minimal one has a very simple dial, with a flat surface and plain printed markers. I didn't get that one though. I went for the version with the Roman numerals, because it has a lot more detail and in my opinion just looks way better. Both versions either come with a strap or a bracelet. I always recommend buying the version with the bracelet with any watch, because it's simple enough to swap out the strap for an aftermarket option, but finding a replacement bracelet is a lot more difficult to do. Now before we get into the technicals and the specifications, let's have a quick chat about the style of this watch and what occasion is it best suited for. Both versions of this watch have a definite dressy feel, with the lack of a bezel and minimal dial layouts. The flat version is certainly the dressiest of the two, leaning heavily into the Bauhaus design language and avoiding any clutter on the dial. With the bracelet though, I think this watch is a little more casual. It would definitely work with t-shirt and jeans, but swap out the bracelet for a leather strap and you have an automatic watch that is ready for any formal event. So if you're liking this watch so far, then take a look at the specifications, because this is where it might be make or break for you. So we do have a full stainless steel construction, including the case, which is surprisingly sometimes not made out of stainless steel at this price point. I'm looking at you, Timex. It features a pretty average pressed clasp and hollow end links. The bracelet is also made from steel. The links look solid, but they are actually hollow inside. used, but they don't pull your hairs, so this is fine. The crown is push-pull and not signed. The laser engraved caseback is screwed down though, meaning that this watch has 50 meters of water resistance, which technically means that it can be swam with, although I usually recommend avoiding serious water submersion on watches that have less than 100 meters. Covering the dial we have a flat mineral crystal, which will pick up scratches over time, but given this is a dressier watch, it will likely only be worn on occasions where it should avoid picking up too many scratches. Inside the Citizen we have the Miyota 8200. As Citizen owns Miyota, this is technically an in-house movement, similar to what Hamilton and Tissot do with the ETA movements, but we'll discuss this movement a little later in the video, because it's probably one of the biggest issues that I have with this watch. Now I have a tiny wrist, so I'm always very careful when picking up a new watch in terms of the size. I have a very certain set of dimensions that I know work best for my wrist. So does this Citizen work on a smaller wrist like mine, and how would it actually work on a larger wrist too? If you like the Orient Bambino for its size, then you'll probably be happy with this watch too. We have a fan favourite 40mm case diameter, a rather pleasing 11mm thickness, and a fairly compact 46mm lug-to-lug. On paper, these wearing dimensions are perfect. The lug-to-lug means that it should work on wrists as small as 6 inches, but the 40mm case easily works on larger wrists too. For me though, this watch looks a bit larger on the wrist than I'd usually like. Don't get me wrong, the watch is comfortable to wear, but I think that because this watch doesn't have much of a bezel, visually the watch looks a lot larger than it actually is. It certainly looks much larger than a 40mm dive watch, for example. This is a similar problem to that I had with the Orient Bambino. For me, a dressier watch like this should be smaller. 38mm would be the sweet spot, but that's just my preference. The watch does wear well and should pretty much work on any size wrist. Now let's move on to the most impressive part of this watch. For me, the dial on this Citizen is way more interesting than any sub $100 watch has any right being. This model has Roman numerals at every 2-hour interval. I like this, as full Roman numeral dials can often look too busy and ruin the minimal aesthetic. The Roman numeral version also has an interesting dial surface, which looks like a honeycomb style texture. The dial is also sunburst, which when combined with the textured dial means that the dial plays with light nicely. Different viewing angles will give you a different visual experience. All of the printing on this piece is done in white, however the printed sections are raised above the rest of the dial, which really makes them pop. The outer dial sees relief from the honeycomb texture, with a flat finish instead. This is where the minute markers sit. The day date window at the 3 o'clock is quite small. I know this will be a big negative to some of you out there. It probably is for me too. My philosophy is either commit to the day date and make it stand out, or keep the dial free of any cutouts. The handset is sword style and features lume. The hands are nice and big though, and do feel in proportion with the rest of the dial. There's a nice amount of detail here without the dial being too flashy or cluttered. Remember, if you want something that's more simple, the other version without the Roman numerals is a lot more plain. Right, let's take off this watch's case back and inspect what makes it tick. Because although this is an automatic watch, and that's what really makes it stand out and good value, is it a bad movement that would actually be better off if it was just quartz? So inside the Citizen is the Miyota 8200, which is an automatic movement that features a day-date complication. This movement beats at 21,600 vibrations per hour and has a power reserve of 45 hours. This movement is a bit of a dinosaur compared to modern movements. It has a slow beat rate, fairly short power reserve, and it doesn't feature hacking seconds. But for you mechanical nuts out there who exclusively collect mechanical, I'm sure it does the job for you. My biggest issue with this movement comes when the watch is on the wrist. I have never experienced such a loud automatic movement in my life. It genuinely sounds like a plane is taking off on your wrist when the rotor is spinning, so be warned. Although this does have an automatic movement, it's one of the most basic you'll likely experience. Finally, do I recommend that you buy this watch? Overall, I think this watch is okay. It certainly has its flaws with that loud movement and average build quality, but it does the job it's supposed to do. Most dress watches fall short in the specifications department, so I can't be too mad at this one for doing the same thing. After all, this is the cheapest automatic Japanese watch that you can buy. It literally has no competition. Would I recommend going for a 40mm Orient Bambino over this watch? Probably. Are you better off buying a Citizen EcoDrive watch for the same price? Probably. But I know you guys love your automatic movements too much to do that, so here you go. A sub $100 Japanese automatic watch, which is officially the cheapest mechanical Japanese watch on the current market. And remember to head over over to toptierticker.com for some cool, pre-owned, affordable watches. The link is in the description. If you liked this video and want to learn about a super under the radar watch brand that's from Japan, be sure to watch my video here on screen on your next favorite Japanese watch brand.